Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Consultants Corner. In today's new era where collaboration and partnership is becoming ever more prevalent, it is more important than our belief that open narrative and sharing is absolutely vital. The industry possesses some really exceptional operators, contractors, and consultants, and our aim is to bring greater insights which can often hide hidden away. I'm really happy to be joined by my co-host Kat. Hi, Kat.
Hello.
And our guest this evening is David Reed, Chairman of Prestige Purchasing Limited. Hi, David.
Hi, good to see you.
That was a bit of a mouthful. It's great for you to be with us this evening.
It's a long web address.
It certainly is. So, for our audience, we are going to be asking you a few questions to gain your insights today, and just starting with, tell us about yourself and your career.
Okay, well, I started by doing a degree in hotel and catering, which I kind of scraped through, and at the end of that, decided that I didn't really have any experience of hotel and catering. I spent most of the time in the classroom. So I spent 2 or 3 years working as a chef, working as a waiter, working as a, I was going to say a housemaid, but a houseman. I don't know what you call it. And basically do all the basic jobs that you do in a hotel, just to try and understand actually what the hell I was doing. And I ended up in having a career in hotel management with a business that doesn't exist anymore called Crest Hotels, which were part of the Bass Brewing Group in those days, which also doesn't exist in the same way anymore. And I led Crest as it was taken over by THF in 1990, and then ended up in purchasing and supply operations for that organization. And then ultimately, when that was taken over by Granada, doing the same thing. So at some time around the age of 40, I thought, actually, you know what, I've had enough of corporate. And the phone rang and somebody said, would you like to buy a company which does procurement expertise? And I thought, well, I could probably do that. And I bought it. And 25 years later, I'm here. Well, I won't say in charge of an empire because it's far from it, but I've got a good, solid, and successful business. So that's my career story.
That's amazing. That's amazing, David. And from your career so far, what are the highlights of your role? What have been the highlights?
Well, I guess looking inwardly first, I would say that within the market in which Prestige operates, there are a lot of aggregation-based businesses. So what they do is they pile spend of all their clients together and then try and take a baseball bat and beat the suppliers up and try and get better price. And we said right from the word go, we didn't want to do that. We wanted to have a proper, transparent consultancy and services business where basically everything was paid for by the client, and then they get the net deals which deliver them the value. And so I'm very pleased that we've actually delivered on that mission pretty successfully. And as part of that, I think I've built a really great team. And I've got to say, I've got some fantastic people in my business, some of whom have been there virtually from day one. And that's been a source of great pride, actually, that we've built a really strong team of people. But actually, I was thinking a bit wider. I would probably say the evolution of food supply has changed in those 25 years massively. Particularly with regard to quality, to freshness, and also to localism. There was this situation where the very big businesses were gaining more and more traction, and actually local supply was dying back, and that's changed a lot over the last few years. The large businesses are very large still, but we do have a very strong local food supply in the UK. The other things I've really enjoyed and I'm still enjoying is if you compare food service to retail in food, retail basically about 7 organisations control 85-90% of the pound that we spend on food and drink in the UK, and so in those worlds the purchasing and supply chain is really sophisticated and actually a little bit brutal, but certainly very, very successful and professional. And I think that hospitality hasn't always really understood the value that really professional supply chain can deliver to their businesses, and I've really enjoyed helping explain that to the wider industry. And I think also I've enjoyed massively, and still do, talking about change in the food system, because our food system today is damaging the planet and actually making our citizens, not just in the UK but globally, unwell. And I think there are lots and lots of changes in the food system that need to happen, and trying to articulate those and help people understand those has been a big part of the thing that I've enjoyed the most over the last few years.
Thank you. It's really, really insightful, David. And on the flip side of that, what have been the challenges and how have you addressed them over the years?
God, where do you want to start? How long have you got? All those questions. Probably the biggest one, I mean, right now, food inflation in the UK in food service, in hospitality, is running at just under 22%. So if you want a challenge, just start with that one, because it is seriously crippling operators' ability to make decent margin, which at a time when everyone is struggling for cash is really a horrible place to be. But we the best way to deal with that is by really focusing on 2 things, and we've done this with our clients, and I hope have helped educate the industry to do it more as well. The first is there are enormous numbers of decisions which are made day to day in the business about food supply and actually what goes on the plate, and actually seeing those through the perspective of what actually adds value is a really important part of the process. So actually, for example, people often just don't think about it. They say, well, we need 7 deliveries a week. Well, actually, do you? Could you improve the number of fridges that you have so that you can cut down the number of deliveries you have? Or we need to change the menu every single day. Well, actually, do you? Just think about what adds value to the customer here. Does that complexity, is it really required? Because it has a cost attached to it. So that first thing we always do when we're talking about food inflation is we talk about, well, actually, are there simple decisions we could make in the organisation just to make ourselves more attractive to suppliers and to make us more efficient? And those 2 things often yield, I'd say, at least 50% of any improvement in cost that comes out of the process. And then added to that is the second step, which is about managing markets really well. So people often think that the best thing to do is just go out and tender it and get some pricing and then it'll all be fine. But the reality is that the world doesn't operate like that. Food prices fluctuate. So actually really managing the supply market really well and making sure that you're really sharp on your pricing is absolutely key. So those are the kind of things that you deal with on inflation. I think there are some other kind of big challenges. Data is probably the biggest single challenge that the whole sector faces from a procurement perspective. I think if you think about the way that a food supply chain is put together, you start with a farmer or a fisherman or a hunter, and then there's usually some form of processing that happens immediately after the farmer. And then there's usually some degree of value add, a manufacturer who does something to a product. So the processor will perhaps package a product, but then there'll be perhaps some cooking that's done to it or part preparation, and then it has to hit the distribution part of the chain. And all of these things add a huge amount of complexity. And the trouble is that we don't understand that complexity as it reaches us in at the kitchen door, because every single one of those steps, and there's typically 5 or 6 steps in a supply chain, each one of those is operating in a silo from a data perspective. So there's no data running through it. Now we're beginning to see some really big developments happening. There's a couple of organizations starting to really join up those supply chains, and that is going to have one very big effect, which will be it will dramatically cut waste in supply chains, because at the moment you get what's called a bullwhip effect. When someone places an order, then the next person in the chain adds 10% because they're worried about not being enough, and then the next person adds 10%, and the next person adds 10%. Before you know, you're just constantly overstocking. So that's probably the other major big challenge that we face as a sector.
And David, you spoke about inflation in the UK. Do you see the same impact around the world outside of the UK?
Yes, but probably not as much as we're seeing here. And there are the first thing to say is that pricing is global now. If you look at how commodity markets operate, if for example, we see it regularly here at the moment, you get a situation where say a flour miller has had no material change to their costs, but they want to put their price up 20%. And they want to do it because actually there's a war in Ukraine and there's a shortage of flour, so they can sell it on international markets rather than sell it locally, so it pushes it all up. So pricing is global, but there are specific things that really make a difference, and probably the biggest one in the UK has been Brexit, where the costs of trade have risen significantly as a result of Brexit, and that, by the way, is before we get into a place where border checks on inbound fresh product are introduced, because the government keeps kicking the can down the road on that because they're afraid of the inflationary effects of it. So does that answer your question, Kat?
It does, yeah. I was just wondering if there is any opportunity that we can see this improving or not, but I don't think we will.
Well, actually, in fairness, I think we will see inflation coming down. We're at 21.5% at the moment. By the end of the year, we're projecting that food inflation will be running in hospitality at about 12%, and by the end of the following year, it will be about 4%. But you've just got to remember that inflation is a measure of how prices go up. So 12% inflation is still much bigger than we had for years. So, falling inflation doesn't mean prices go down. That's deflation, and we won't see deflation probably until 2025, if at all.
Very good, thanks.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you feel, just on the back of what you've said in terms of those challenges, do you feel that now it's easier for operators to transfer that cost, that increase, or do you think it's still challenging for them to pass that on to a client? Are our clients more educated now and appreciative of the climate that we operate in, and are they more willing than years ago to actually accept increasing costs?
I think it massively depends upon which market vertical inside hospitality you're referring to. It's significantly difficult in very competitive environments. So if you look at the dining sector, for example, particularly the mid-market casual dining chains, where there's a bit of oversupply of that kind of business in the market at the moment, and there's a cost of living crisis coming on. You have a situation where, in reality, people will trade down to a quick service restaurant, or they'll just not eat out, and that's impacting volumes, which makes operators much more resistant to raising prices. And you can see that by the fact that if you look at the market data, I think on average prices in the dining sector have risen about 10 or 11%, whereas inflation has been about 21. So that's likely to continue. And what operators have done is they've mitigated in different ways. They've simplified their menus. They've changed the ranging in their menus to have higher margin dishes. They've found ways to mitigate that inflation. But of course, as it's still rising, it becomes more and more difficult to do that.
Okay, thank you. And my last question before I hand over to Kat, what do you consider to be the future trends in the industry, and how can we prepare for the change?
I think the first question is easier than the second question, without doubt. There's a few things. I think we are kind of polarizing a little bit in the industry now. We're starting to see people wanting healthier food in a way that we probably haven't seen in my 25-year journey in purchasing and supply. Although you're also seeing indulgence, the other end of that scale, also growing quite heavily as people seek to cheer themselves up. That would be one. But I think, from a supply chain perspective, there's probably two or three. The main one would be sustainable supply. You're starting to see the introduction of carbon ratings on menus, for example. We're starting to see, even in the quick service restaurant area where people are taking packaged food away, we're starting to see them being color labeled and color coded. And we're also seeing a huge amount of interest from consumers in the origin and the provenance of the food they're eating and the sustainability credentials they have. And that those may be as broad as, what plastic was used here, how is waste handled. We're seeing consumers, a lot of the operators are reporting a lot of interest from diners about those kind of things. But probably the biggest, there's two other big trends. The first is regenerative farming. I think is beginning to find its feet and is starting to grow very fast. You may have noticed McCain's chips, for example, are committing to by 2030 to have every single potato regeneratively farmed. And by the way, for those that don't know what regenerative farming is, it's basically farming where the inputs and the outputs are in balance. So in other words, you're not harming the farm as actually intensive farming does. So if you pour chemicals into the soil, it washes all the nutrients away. It kills the soil, and therefore you have a negative spiral. So regenerative farming is about looking after the environment properly. The problem with regenerative farming, of course, is that it's more expensive to produce product, and of course the challenge for that is that if you take intensively farmed product, when a farmer pours chemicals into a field, it creates a thing called runoff. That runoff often goes into rivers, which causes a horrible thing called eutrophication, where algae becomes very predominant. Nobody on a farm ever has to pay for the damage that's caused to our rivers. It's the water companies that carry the burden for that, and yet they're creating that by delivering cheaper food. So we have to get to a situation where that changes and we produce food that is regeneratively farmed produce is more nutritious, and it's also better for the environment. So it's very important we get there. The question is we need to deal with that externalization of cost issue.
Yeah.
And just one other brief point about that is that if you take the global view on food waste, for example, about a third of the food we produce in the globe is actually wasted. It spoils before it gets to the plate. So if we just reduce that by half, that food waste, that would more than fund regenerative agriculture globally to hit the same prices we have today. Now, that's a really easy statement to make. It's a very difficult mission to deliver that transition, but that's kind of what needs to happen, I think. And then the last of the future trends, I think we're about to see a really, really big explosion in what I would call disruptive products. So probably the biggest one of those is precision fermentation, which is a means by which you can produce alternative meats from vegetable proteins. And the science of that is really getting quite advanced now, to the point where the stuff that is horribly processed, the Beyond Meat stuff that you can buy from the supermarket today, which is, it is so chemically laden. It's well, I don't like it, let's put it that way. But some of the advances we're seeing in that, and it also in cultured meat, meat that is grown rather than reared, those kind of things are going to really hit the market in the next 5 to 7 years in a big way. And that will disrupt, I think, ultimately, it'll disrupt farming, actually, because actually people will start to go, well, actually, I don't want to kill animals to do this stuff if I can eat this stuff instead.
But
so I think we are into a big future change there.
Is it just as nutritious, though, to have something that's artificially produced?
Well, theoretically, it not only is it more environmentally friendly, because of course you're not producing all of the byproducts that the animal system produces, but theoretically at least one should be able to, and we're still not there yet, so to actually say it's there today is not quite true. But I think in many of these foods, they will be as nutritious, if not more nutritious, because essentially you can, particularly if you take cultured meat, for example, you can genetically change that meat to be more nutritious. So the answer to your question is, I think so, ultimately.
Wow.
Quite a big social debate, I think this could end up to, yeah.
Absolutely. But I think we have to, for me, the thing that often gets undervalued in the social debate is actually the environmental impacts, because 1/3 of greenhouse gases are produced in the food system, partly because food is expensive from a carbon perspective to move around, but actually, the production process itself is very carbon intensive too. So I think if we're going to deliver a world that is properly green, we do have to think about those kind of issues. And I completely agree with you, by the way. There are some huge social discussions to be had in there.
And I think apart from the sustainability that is driving these changes, it's also the medical industry, which, we hear about the plant-based diets and how they're good for you, and how you actually have got less chances to get cancer, and therefore a lot of people are moving into plant-based diets. So I think whatever is happening in the sustainability environment, but also in the medical science, it's heavily going to be impacting what we're doing here.
Well, there's a lot of discussion going on around personalization of diet, where particularly in those kind of products, those game-changing products, should we say, there's much more potential to create specific product for specific medical needs. So there's a whole load of stuff in there, which frankly. I won't be around to see, I suspect.
I was speaking to a friend of mine, she's a GP, and she was talking to me about lifestyle medicine that is actually coming into the NHS now, and how you can look into specifically your circumstances to actually identify what type of diet you would need. Quite fascinating.
It is.
There's a big debate as well around longevity as well, and how you can. It's about the blue zones. I don't know a lot about it, but there's blue zones and certain things you can do to lengthen your lifespan. So, and some of it includes food and nutrition. It's just a fascinating area. We wouldn't have time to cover all of it on this on our session with you today, David. But it's one for debate to note for sure.
Okay, I'll carry on then. Can you give the
Okay.
audience your top 3 recipes for success working with clients, caterers, and consultants?
God, I'm not sure I've got 3. I'm not sure I've got 3 actually. I think the things that we've done that I think have led to success. The first would be there's cookie cutter solutions don't work. Every hospitality business is different, and in fact, they cherish their points of difference. And so, trying to put in, particularly in supply, trying to put in a cookie cutter solution is entirely the wrong answer. So, I think teaching our people to listen and to learn about the particular market verticals that they're working in, and also the individual businesses that they're working alongside would be a big one. I think probably the other big one for me, I may not get to 3, but the other big one in procurement and supply chain is just about honesty, openness, transparency, communication. Because the more we talk and the more open we are, the more success we deliver. And I think it really is as simple as that. You know, it's about we have a saying in the business which is first they like us, then they trust us, then they work with us. And I think that's kind of where our business has built its success.
Very good, thanks. Next question is, how would you like to see the sector evolve and change? I know we talked about a lot about these things, sustainability, the data. So is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I guess we've kind of touched a little on these, but so I won't go into too much detail. But I think there's a real opportunity now for shorter, fresher supply chains and more diversity of supply. In a way, you know, particularly with the internet now, the ability to be able to tap into fresh regional and local supply, which all the big boys, and I know them all really well, will hate me saying, but you know, I think there is a real place for that in our future. It's better environmentally, and it's often better nutritionally. I'd certainly be hoping for even less intensive farming with lower inputs because of the impacts that have on the environment. And I think less big agriculture, ultra processed foods in our food chain. They are making us unwell, and they're not very nutritious at all. And actually, they just give people cheap food, which drives their marketing budgets, which drives their profits. And actually, food matters more than that, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more. We talked a lot about sustainability as well. The next question is about the importance of sustainability in today's world. We talked about the sustainability in the supply chain for food and how it is impacting what we're doing worldwide. Anything else to add?
Well, I think, you know, when you sent me the list of questions that you were going to ask, I think this one was phrased, how important is sustainability today? And I would say not at all, according to Her Majesty's government, because they've just pitched the food waste measurement legislation, which even the whole industry wants to do, and they've kicked it into the long grass. And yeah, personally, I think the biggest threat to climate, achieving our climate goals, is politics. It's nothing to do with us as consumers. It's nothing to do with the industry. Of course, they're all doing good things and everyone's working hard on it. But the biggest risk is politics. So I think voters need to be really clear on this. And whoever is committing to supporting climate change reduction is the people that you should vote for. And it really matters. Everybody should be on it.
It matters, and it matters not just for the next 5 years or the 10, but more importantly for the next 20 or 30.
Absolutely.
Okay, my last question is, what advice would you give to new players entering the profession?
Well, I think hospitality is an amazing sector, right? I've loved my career in hospitality. It's a sector that gives a huge return on effort and talent. You know, people who put in the yards and have got talent always, in my experience, succeed and do well. and it's the most inclusive of the sectors I've come across. You know, it really does. It's a really inclusive sector. So my advice is probably three things. One is listen and be humble. People tend to get on well in this sector if they just shut their mouth and listen for a while, and actually don't be Billy Big Boots, you know. But on the other hand, always ask for more. Ask for more development, ask for more responsibility, and ask for more reward. Because if you're worth it, you should be asking for it. And then lastly, I think the big thing for me is about focusing on owning outcomes. The people who do well in hospitality are people who say, I got it, I'll fix it, don't worry. There's loads of people with opinions, but the people who actually say, don't worry about it, I can deal with that, are the people who get on. So that's my advice. Really simple stuff.
I think it's not just in hospitality. I think it's everywhere, really, every industry, right? The doers. Yeah. That's all from me today. Maxine, back to you.
Thank you. So, so just to sum up, we talked a bit about Brexit and how that has actually impacted and made a real difference in our industry. We talked about being honest and open in terms of some of the top 3 recipes for success, some of the challenges around data and inflation, and real insights there from you, David, in terms of sustainability, and some real great nuggets in terms of the future trends that are coming our way as well. I really want to thank you for your time, for your insights, for your knowledge sharing today. And with that, I want to thank our audience for listening. Our co-host Kat, thank you so much for your input and joining us as well today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So this has been Consultants Corner, creating better understanding and insight and changing our industry narrative. Thank you, and see you again soon.